In the name of God, the Holy Trinity, Creator, Redeemer and Sanctifier. Amen. Sometimes there are phrases which enter into our psyches or our common vocabulary. Not happy Jan might be one of them. In a similar line, John's "You brood of vipers" might become one of them. It certainly is a favourite of preachers in this season of the year. Far more likely, however, is that you've heard the phrase attributed to Charles Darwin, "survival of the fittest." We've come to understand this, at least in popular culture, or as lived out in my garden, as survival of the strongest. Survival of the fittest, a phrase actually coined by Herbert Spencer after he had read Darwin, has come to mean in our popular understanding a survival of the most dominant, the most likely to defeat the rest. Seen in this light, survival becomes a ruthless competition in a Hunger Games or Squid Games style. And this is not a new understanding of humanity. Almost 200 years before Darwin, the English philosopher Thomas Hobbes wrote that the lives of early humans were nasty, brutish and short. We have told ourselves a narrative that strength and might is right and leads to life. But that narrative is misunderstood. New research reported in the November 27th edition of New Scientist suggests other than survival of the fittest. Reflecting on the latest archaeological and genetic evidence, the editor wrote, "We shouldn't be so hard on ourselves. In fact, our soft skills, compassion, tolerance, and the desire to make connections with others may have been the secret to our survival through climate swings. The social networks formed as a result of our emotional nature were a vital insurance policy for tougher times, allowing our early Homo sapien ancestors to share not only food and resources, but ideas. This, in turn, left us better able to adapt." So what we could say instead of this dominant narrative of survival of the fittest, survival of the strongest, is that really our story is the survival of the compassionate. And the crowds asked John, "What then should we do?" In reply, he said to them, "Whoever has 2 coats must share with anyone who has none, and whoever has food must do likewise." Even tax collectors came to be baptized, and they asked him, "Teacher, what should we do?" He said to them, "Collect no more than the amount prescribed for you." Soldiers also asked him, "And we, what should we do?" He said to them, "Do not extort money from anyone by threats or false accusation, and be satisfied with your wages." John challenges the people coming for baptism. "What is your motivation?" he asks them. "Are you hoping that this is a spiritual insurance policy? Are you claiming that your ancestry through Abraham is enough?" And when they ask him, "Well then, what should we do?" John replies with exactly that, with actions, with what they should do. And these are actions of compassion, actions of tolerance, actions of building a better community. It's not enough to say that this is already what these people should have been doing. Those who came to be baptised, especially the tax collectors and the soldiers, Accepted culture made it reasonable for those groups to do the things which were abuses of their power, to extort money, to make false accusations, to live from the fear of others. The culture then made it a reasonable assumption. And we too, 2,000 years later, find things within our own culture which we pass by, abuses of justice, that popular understanding has deemed reasonable. John calls the people back, rather directly, to what is at the heart of faith and living, as individuals and as a community, living what Jesus proclaims as the two great commandments, loving God and treating others as you wish to be treated yourself. This is a way of life which upends the narrative of the dominant, strongest, fittest. This is a way of life in which compassion is strength, in which gentleness is greater than fear and hate. Make no mistake, the words of John can equally apply now. For some, marking a box on a census form with an expression of faith is an equivalent of a spiritual insurance policy, tucked away in a drawer, comforting to know it exists, useful in emergencies, but otherwise we don't need to ring the helpline. It's a paper faith, not a lived faith, not a faith which shows a transformation of heart. And Advent calls us back to this transformation of heart. As Father Stephen said last week, not with the penitence of Lent, but with the hope that is found in waiting. This is what we can be. This is what we are called to be. And the story of the Incarnation is one of the triumph of compassion over all the present difficulties. A sympathetic innkeeper, a faithful and attentive spouse, kind-hearted shepherds, generous foreigners. Imagine for a moment how different it would have been if this dominant, fittest, strongest narrative had taken over. If Joseph had spurned Mary, if there had been no room at the inn or out the back, if the shepherds had not rejoiced, if the Magi had not risked and believed. But all of these, at a great time of risk and danger, individually and collectively, showed compassion, tolerance, understanding, and love. And into this community, Christ was born. Charles Darwin didn't write the phrase survival of the fittest. What Darwin wrote was, it is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent. It is the one most adaptable to change. How will we, as a community, respond to this challenge of compassionate change around us? How will we respond with transformed hearts and tolerance and love? How will we exhibit this through lived faith, recognising that for most people, the impression that they have formed of Christians is formed through negative or out-of-touch representations through media and popular culture, a dominant narrative which is not the truth at all? How will we avoid becoming cast as John's brood of vipers and instead be known for our marks of compassion? How will we avoid being trapped in a vortex of our own unmaking and instead be active not just in survival, but in bringing and ensuring life? And in all these things, the answers are found in our heart, where God dwells. Are we open to the transformation of our heart, and through that, to the transformation of the lives we live, not just here, but in our living? We live this transformation by nourishing our faith. We live it by spending time in prayer. We gather in worship. We encourage one another. We care for one another. We build connections. We are people of hope. We act from a place of compassion, speaking out against injustice and giving voice to those whom the nasty and the brutish would turn aside and trample. We take Mary's song, the Magnificat, as our rallying cry, and we sing it in our hearts and through our lives. And most of all, we live it. For this is more than survival, this is life, the life of the compassionate. Amen.